You don't belong here. Move along." The soldier's voice was sharp and dismissive as his palm waved the old man away like a stray leaf. Morning light barely broke over Fort Talbot's cracked sidewalks and silent hangars. Major Elias Rourke, or what was left of him, stood perfectly still, hands wrapped around a battered broom that had seen too many dawns. Weather-beaten face, silver hair, worn jacket patched at the elbows. And eyes that had witnessed more than most living men. He nodded without a sound and took one careful step back into the mist. The world was quieter then, the only noise the slow scrape of coarse bristles along concrete. The gate groaned as a black SUV eased through, headlights dying in the gauzy gray. Doors opened. Boots touched asphalt. Out of the vehicle emerged General Colin Merrick. Broad-shouldered, metals gleaming like polished coins against dark wool, he moved with stiff, measured grace. The years had drawn deep lines across his brow, but his gaze remained sharp as ever. A soldier to the bone. Merrick paused just past the gate. Someone, had caught his eye. A figure hunched over a broom at the edge of his world. The general froze mid-stride. Time bent. The gatehouse light shuddered. And then, impossibly, recognition broke across Merrick's face. He took one slow, trembling breath and spoke across the quiet morning. "Major Elias Rourke, is that really you?" The question hung between them like the ghost of a long-dead order. And though the old man's hands did not waver on his broom, something deeper had shifted. The fog at Fort Talbot thinned just a little as past and present collided in the fragile light of a new day. Every morning, just before the Arizona sun scraped its way above the jagged hills and rusting barracks of Fort Talbot, a lone figure appeared at the east gate. He came with the same rhythm as a drill cadence, clockwork regularity that no one could explain. Major Elias Rourke, though nobody here used that title anymore. To most of the personnel on base he was just an old man with a battered broom, someone who arrived like a shadow and left without a trace. At precisely 0600, never a minute early or late, he took his station along the cracked asphalt and began sweeping. Left to right. Fence to curb. Sidewalk. Gutter. Each stroke was measured, deliberate, as if every grain of dust deserved attention. The broom itself was a relic. Its wooden handle was worn smooth by decades of hands and its bristles splayed like the tail of a tired dog, bound together with duct tape and string. It was as patched as the man who wielded it, bearing the silent dignity of something too stubborn to give up. And so the ritual continued in the half-light, the only sound the rhythmic scratch of coarse straw against concrete. Few noticed him. Some smirked. "Probably thinks he's guarding the whole base," one soldier had joked. "Colonel Clean," another had dubbed him with a snicker. And most simply brushed him off like they might a faded mural or a cracked pane of glass, too small and too familiar to matter. But Private First Class Noah Barnes began to look closer. Something about the old man didn't match the tired rhythm of someone merely passing time. No, there was an intensity in the way he moved. No wasted motion. No lingering pause. It was the posture of someone who had once commanded attention and who now answered only to some inner call. Noah started making small offerings. A cup of hot coffee left at the edge of the sidewalk, a folded napkin placed neatly under its rim so it wouldn't blow away. Each time he left one, he'd steal a glance as the old man paused mid-sweep, acknowledged the gesture with a slow incline of his head, as though it were a salute exchanged across some invisible battlefield, and then continued his work as if he had never paused at all. No words. No questions. Just an understanding between two men who had worn the uniform at different times, in different worlds. More and more, Noah began to realize that this was not simply a habit born of retirement or loneliness. The way the old soldier paused at the yellow-painted security line, careful not to set one worn boot across it. The way his gaze swept up to the flag each morning as though silently reporting for duty. And the way he never, ever spoke to anyone unless they spoke first. Weeks passed into months, and a few other junior enlisted began to notice him too. Some kept their distance. Others murmured about who he might have been. A ghost of some long-ago campaign. A veteran forgotten by the system. A soul that refused to leave its post. Yet none of them knew his name. And none of them asked. And so the old man remained a fixture at Fort Talbot's East Gate, his broom tracing its slow, disciplined arcs across the pavement as the sun rose higher. He was part of the landscape now, a shadow folded into every morning, and only Private Barnes thought to wonder who he really was. And why, after all these years, he was still here, quietly sweeping the path as if waiting for someone who had yet to arrive. Some mornings Noah would stand just inside the gate, coffee in hand, and watch the old man move. He noticed a pocket in the soldier's threadbare jacket that was never quite empty. One morning a breeze caught the flap just enough to reveal a worn photograph inside. The edges curled. The image too small to see from a distance, but sharp enough in the light to show 8 men. Young. Uniformed. Dust-streaked and proud. Noah didn't dare stare too long. But he tucked that image away in his thoughts, where it sat like an unanswered question. And every day as the broom whispered across the sidewalk, the question only grew louder. By the time summer rolled in and the desert wind began to taste of heat and sage, everyone who passed the gate had learned to accept the ritual as part of their mourning. No one knew him. And yet somehow, everyone did. And so long as the broom moved in its steady, familiar rhythm, it felt like someone was still standing watch. And someone was. And though nobody could have guessed just how far back those watchful eyes reached, or what battles they had already fought and survived, one thing was certain. Major Elias Rourke was not here by accident. And he was not leaving anytime soon. Noah's curiosity only deepened with each passing day. He began to rise earlier just to catch the old soldier before the morning bustle, hoping for a clue hidden in a glance or a stray word. But the man was like a ghost with a broom, his face carved from granite, his hands sure and practiced. And always that photograph tucked away in his pocket, 8 men frozen forever in some lost war. Then one morning, just as the first light scraped gold across the barracks roofs, a chance wind tugged the jacket open again. This time, Noah caught a clear glimpse of a faded embroidered patch sewn inside the lining, a simple name stitched into the fabric, Rourke. That stopped him cold. He had heard that name before. Back in the barracks, he dug into his training manuals, the dusty binders in the common room, then finally the old archive database that most had forgotten. He searched, and searched some more. That name kept pulling at him like a thread snagged on some jagged corner of memory. And there it was. A scanned file. Operation Winter Current. Southeast Asia, 1975. The header was stamped top secret. Lines of the report were blacked out. But there was one photograph left intact. A muddy chopper, flame-scorched and tilted on its landing skids. And a crew of men grinning at the camera, hands clasping one another's shoulders. Noah froze. He recognized the face that stared back at him. Younger, leaner, but unmistakable, Major Elias Rourke. And then the words beneath. Major Elias Rourke, missing. Presumed Kia. Mission status, unresolved. No remains recovered. Noah read it 3 times, his heart pounding in his ears. This was no simple veteran. This was a ghost from a clandestine past, one who had been left off the official rolls and consigned to history's dark margins. That explained the battered jacket. That explained the battered broom. And that explained the way the old man moved like someone forever awaiting orders. But why was he here? Why now, after all these years? And what had really happened on Winter Current? He dug deeper. A redacted summary. A list of the men who went in, 8 names, and one who never made it back. The note spoke of a firefight that lasted until sunrise. Of radio silence. Of decisions made too quickly in the dark. And then there was one final notation, typed so lightly on the bottom of the page that Noah had to squint to see it. Classified by order of Major General Merrick. Merrick. That was the same name stitched into every briefing note that crossed Fort Talbot's desk. The same man who now held a star on his collar and roamed these halls as its top commander. Noah sat back and exhaled. The weight of it settled into him. The past was stirring in the desert morning, its long-buried secrets sweeping back into the light with every careful stroke of a broom. He thought of the old soldier's hands wrapped around that worn handle, brushing away dust as if it could hide nothing. He thought of the way Rourke paused at the gate every morning, eyes fixed as if expecting someone to appear. And he thought of Merrick, whose name loomed in that faded report like a shadow over the desert. Suddenly, the story was bigger than one overlooked veteran. It was a story someone had decided to erase. And Elias Rourke had returned to make sure it would never truly disappear. When Noah finally shut the file, his hands were trembling. He stood, tucked the pages back where he'd found them, and gazed out the barracks window toward the gate. There was the faint scrape of a broom on asphalt. And somewhere beyond it, the soft sound of an old soldier waiting. That morning, for the first time in years, Private First Class Noah Barnes felt like history had eyes, and they were watching him back. Noah spent the rest of that day wrestling with the weight of what he had uncovered. He kept turning over the pieces in his mind, the photograph tucked close to Rourke's heart, the redacted report in the archives, the worn uniform jacket with the stitched name hidden inside like a secret. And most of all, one word kept circling back into his thoughts like a stray leaf in the wind: Winter Current. That evening, in the dim light of the barracks lounge, he finally decided to speak up. A few enlisted men sat scattered around, some playing cards at a scuffed wooden table, some zoning out in front of the television as a sports highlight reel ran in a tired loop. Noah hesitated in the doorway. His hands felt clammy. Then he cleared his throat. "Hey," he began, trying to sound casual as several eyes turned his way, "any of you ever hear of a Major Elias Rourke?" There was a brief silence, then Corporal Ramirez snorted. "That the guy sweeping the sidewalk every morning? Old-timer? Pretty sure his only war these days is with gum wrappers." More laughter followed. "Man," Sergeant Pierce added, tossing a bent playing card onto the table, "there are hundreds of vets around here. Probably just some guy who thinks he's on watch. Even if he was someone once, he's not one of us now." He waved a dismissive hand. Noah felt his fists tighten. "You ever read anything about Winter Current? Southeast Asia, 75? That earned him a few puzzled looks. "Sounds like some classroom history stuff," one soldier muttered. "Never heard of it," another replied with a shrug. And then they all went back to their distractions as if history had never walked past their gate every morning. But Noah wasn't satisfied. That night, when most of the base had quieted and only the low hum of an air conditioner kept him company, he slipped into the small administrative office. He logged into the base records terminal and began searching, carefully this time. He dug deeper into the digital shelves than most dared, into personnel rosters, commendation files, missing in action reports. And then there it was. Major Elias Rourke. Unit, Special Tactics. Mission, Winter Current, 1975. Status, missing, presumed Kia. And right next to that file was a name that made his breath catch. Colin Merrick. Current commanding officer of Fort Talbot. And decades ago? Intelligence liaison on Operation Winter Current. Noah felt a chill pass through him. That meant the one who controlled this base now had been there then, had seen Rourke disappear into the jungle and never come home. And Rourke was right here. Still here. Waiting. By the time dawn began to rise and pale light filled the barracks, Noah was already at the gate. And so was the old soldier. Sweeping. Steady strokes. Left to right. Noah took a breath. Sir, he began carefully, stepping closer than he ever had before. I know who you are. I've read the reports. You're Major Elias Rourke. You were on Winter Current. You never left, did you? That stopped him. Mid-sweep, hands frozen on the wooden handle. He didn't look at Noah, didn't say a word, but the silence between them was loud enough to make the morning air feel heavy. Finally, after what felt like forever, Rourke gave a single, tiny nod. So slight that if Noah hadn't been watching carefully, he might have missed it. I thought so, Noah whispered. Somewhere overhead, a lone crow broke the silence with a rasping cry. And then Rourke resumed his work, left to right, fence to curb, as if this was all that mattered. That was the morning Colonel Jessup's order appeared on the duty roster. New restrictions. Civilian loitering near base property was no longer permitted. And as Noah read it, he understood perfectly what that order meant. Someone high up had noticed the old soldier. Someone who hoped that, with enough pressure, Elias Rourke would vanish like dust on the wind. But Noah was already decided. That was not going to happen, not on his watch. Because someone had to remember. And someone had to listen. And whatever it took, he was going to make sure Major Elias Rourke was never forgotten again. The next morning, Noah was waiting by the gate before first light, hands stuffed in his pockets to hide his nervous energy. The desert chill crept into his bones, but he hardly noticed. He was watching for Rourke. And sure enough, as the clock hands ticked toward 0600, the lone figure appeared, broom in hand, boots scuffing against the cracked pavement. Left to right. Fence to curb. Sidewalk. Gutter. Noah studied him carefully. The same measured strokes. The same quiet presence. And yet, Noah could feel the weight of everything unspoken between them. He took a careful breath and stepped closer. Sir, Noah began softly, careful not to startle him, I went looking. I know about Winter Current. And I know who you are. Rourke paused mid-sweep. The wind tugged at the hem of his patched jacket. For a moment, Noah thought the old soldier might ignore him. But then Rourke reached into his pocket and slowly drew out the photograph. That battered image of 8 men in uniform, standing together against the backdrop of a burning helicopter. He held it up for Noah to see properly this time. I thought someone ought to remember, Rourke finally said, his voice like gravel left too long in the rain. Every morning, I wait. For them. For someone who can still see what was left behind. Noah felt a knot in his throat as he stared at the men frozen forever in that photograph. You stayed, he whispered. You stayed to make sure they weren't forgotten. Rourke nodded, gaze fixed on the rising sun. After Winter Current, nobody spoke of what happened. Mission files vanished. Names redacted. And those of us who survived were told to go home and stay quiet. Noah looked toward the distant rooftops of the base, where commanders made decisions that rewrote history. You were left to disappear, he said. More like left to haunt, Rourke replied, a faint ghost of a smile crossing his lips before fading. You sweep long enough, you learn to live with ghosts. That morning, a change rippled across the base. A new face arrived in a black sedan, Colonel Jessup, to post at the gate. He moved with purpose, speaking to a pair of MPs, pointing toward Rourke as they nodded stiffly. Noah's heart kicked against his ribs. He knew what was coming even before the MPs walked toward them. Sir, one said politely but firmly to Rourke, new orders. Civilians can't linger by the gate anymore. The old soldier simply stood there, hands on his broom. You've been sweeping this path for years, the MP continued, a trace of regret in his tone, but the commander says it's over. Noah took a breath. He's not just some civilian, he blurted, stepping between them. He was a major. He led Winter Current. And nobody ever acknowledged him. That made the MPs hesitate. For a second, they glanced at one another, uncertain. And then Colonel Jessup himself appeared, face like carved stone. This is a restricted area, he barked. Move him along. The words hit like a slap. Noah felt a surge of anger and fear as the MPs began to close in, hands ready to escort the old soldier away. And in that charged moment, something shifted. A voice cut through the tense morning air, deeper, colder, carrying the authority of someone who'd given too many orders to ever repeat himself. Stand down. Every head turned. And there, stepping past the gate with his hands clasped behind his back, was a figure they all recognized. General Colin Merrick. Tall and stern, his medals glinting like distant stars. He walked straight toward Rourke, his sharp gaze locking onto the old soldier as though seeing a ghost he'd thought long gone. Silence fell across the base as the general stopped before him. You saved my life, Merrick said quietly. You saved all of us. And then, to the astonishment of everyone, the general raised his hand and saluted. Slow. Full. And unyielding. As the gate cameras whirred softly, capturing the moment forever, every soldier who witnessed it straightened instinctively. And one by one, hands rose to their brows as the morning light broke clean across the tarmac, all paying tribute to a man who had never stopped serving. And Rourke, still holding his broom, finally allowed himself to return the salute. The morning light glowed sharper as a hush fell across Fort Talbot. Every soldier present stood straighter, hands pressed in perfect salute toward Major Elias Rourke, who held his battered broom like a standard and returned the honor with trembling dignity. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that single, perfect moment, the years melted away, the fog of forgotten histories lifting as though the desert wind itself had decided to clear the past. General Merrick stepped closer, his polished boots sounding loud against the cracked concrete. He paused just short of Rourke and let his hand fall slowly to his side. You should never have been left in the dark, he said, voice steady and low. Winter Current wasn't your burden to bear alone. Rourke lowered his broom an inch, his hand still gripping its worn wooden shaft like it was a rifle. "I stayed because someone had to," he replied at last. "I didn't wait for medals. Just hoped one day someone might remember." Merrick nodded, gaze clouded by memories most would never understand. "I remember," he assured him. "I remember every face we lost. And I remember the man who held the line so the rest of us could live." Noah felt his own breath catch. Around him, the other soldiers exchanged looks, some surprised, some ashamed, as if seeing their surroundings anew. Here was the gate they had walked past 1,000 times without a thought. And here was the old man they had dismissed so easily, standing in the morning light, more soldier than any of them had realized. Colonel Jessup hesitated at the edge of the gathering, his mouth a tight line. For him, this was not the outcome he had anticipated. He glanced at the MPs, who had frozen mid-step, hands still reaching but no longer sure of their orders. Merrick turned toward them then. "This post is suspended," he declared with quiet authority. "Major Rourke is not a trespasser. He is one of us. And you will show him the respect he deserves." The MPs took an awkward step back, relief and guilt plain on their faces. And with that, the tension broke like a fragile pane of glass, allowing the morning light to scatter freely across the assembled ranks. Noah felt his heart thrum in his chest. This was what he had hoped for all along, that someone would listen, someone with the power to make it right. And here it was unfolding before him. Merrick gave a single, measured nod toward Rourke. "You have my word, Major," he said firmly. "There will be a formal recognition. Your record will be corrected. Your service will no longer be forgotten." For a long breath, Rourke did not answer. His hand stayed on the broom, knuckles whitened by years of quiet resolve. And then, so softly that only those closest could hear, he murmured, "Thank you, sir. That's all I ever wanted, to know someone still cared." The general's face softened. "More than cared," Merrick replied. "You led. And we're going to make sure everyone knows it." As if sensing the shift in the air, a breeze stirred the morning dust. The broom's worn straw caught the light, and the sound of boots on concrete began again, but this time it was different. This time it was the sound of men and women moving to stand with him, as though they were gathering not just as soldiers but as witnesses to something they had overlooked for far too long. And Rourke, old hands trembling yet steady, finally felt the burden begin to ease. The wait was over. And the gate, for once, was no barrier at all. Before long, the officers began to talk among themselves, already making plans for a ceremony. Ranks would be assembled. Colors would be presented. And the lost chapter of Winter Current would finally come home. And as the desert sun crested the rooftops of Fort Talbot, it cast one long, golden shadow across the gate, straight as a salute, steady as the man who had held his post through every empty morning until this one. And he was ready. And so were they. "He's home."